There are, generally speaking, 206 bones in the adult human body. Each of your hands typically has 27 of them, which means 54 in total between the two of them. This means, on average, hands account for over a quarter of the bones in a body. Okay, one more cursed fact and then we'll move on to the video, I swear. Each finger has the same amount of bones as an arm. Not including your thumb, which my high school teachers were adamant wasn't technically a finger anyways, so... Hello there everyone. For those of you that don't know me, it's nice to meet you. I'm Pippin, and for everyone else, welcome back. This is the third video of my Paint Along series where we work on the resources I give you in the description below together. This video will be a little different from the last one because it is a slightly more complicated subject, so we're getting a little bit into the weeds today because we're talking about hands. Down in the description, you'll find a link to my Google Drive where you can download all of the assets for this video, including the PSD, PNGs of all the slides I'll be working from in case you don't use Krita or something compatible with it, and any special brushes that I use in this tutorial. Remember, I really only use 3 brushes and all of them are standard, but maybe I'll include some silly brush goodies this time, I don't know. And you won't either unless you check out those assets. Anyways, while we go through this video, you will be able to follow along with me on screen or work alongside me while you practice the lesson we have in store. At the end, I've got a little gift coloring page as a thank you for sticking with me. And remember, as always, if you try out this video and you like your results, please tag me when you post them so that I can see. I've created a tag for the series as a whole, so please also tag Archer K Paint Along when you post so that we can find all of them more easily. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor of any sort and all of my anatomy knowledge is research-based for art purposes. This might be a great place to start learning anatomy, but if you want a more professional understanding, I would definitely look for more professional resources. And lastly, remember that this is a series and I will be posting more of these tutorial videos in the future, so if there's anything specific you want to learn, just let me know in the comments. And with all of that explanation stuff out of the way, let's get right to it. Anatomy of a hand. Bones. So, like I said before, an average adult human has 27 bones in each of their hands, not counting sesamoid bones, which we'll talk about at the end of this section. I'm going to show the palmar view, or the palm side of the hand, and the dorsal view, or the back side of the hand, so that hopefully you can get a good idea of the full rotation while we discuss each part. All of those bones start out by connecting to 2 bones in the arm, the radius and the ulna. The bones in the palm area of the hand are called the carpals, think like carpal tunnel. And there are 8 of those. I will almost definitely mispronounce these, but the spelling will be in the image. The lunate, the scaphoid, the triquetrum, the pisiform, the hamate, the capitate, the trapezoid, and the trapezium. These bones are what let your finger bones move in all the crazy ways that they do. If all of them were just one bone, we wouldn't have as full of a range of motion as we do. When drawing, remember that each of the bones of the fingers are informed by these bones in the hands. After that, we have the metacarpals, which are the bones that connect the palm to the fingers. Quick note, according to the scientific article by William M. Wright, J. D. Smith, and David Floyd, titled Nomenclature for Fingers and Phalanges, to Name or to Number, there are 2 methods for naming these bones. One numbers them, in which case you start at Roman numeral 1 for the thumb and go up to 5 for the pinky, or you name them by finger name, so thumb metacarpal, index metacarpal, etc. Their findings dictated that people were more likely to understand you if you used the finger names, so that's what we're going to do for all of the finger bones, even if it's technically less correct. Every finger, and if you're a stickler for details, the thumb has a metacarpal bone. These are generally the longest bones in the hands if you're not counting the thumbs, which is significantly shorter. The thing many artists often don't register when studying is that these are the bones that look like fingers that sit inside of the hands, but not the fingers. When you're drawing boxy shapes for the hands, these all fit into the palm box. These bones exist for a lot of the same reason the carpals do. They're called metacarpals because they come after the carpals, and the movement of the fingers relies on the carpals, but is changed by the metacarpals. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to curve our hands like this, but they're still more constricted by each other than the next bones that we're going to talk about. Next are the phalanges, which are the part of the fingers that separate from the hand and make them fingers. They're also the main difference in bones between the fingers and the thumb. Each of the 4 real fingers has 3 phalange bones: the proximal, or first bone connected to the hand, the middle, or second bone, and the distal, or last bone. The thumb only has the proximal and distal bones. These are the bones that allow for all of the finger movement. Without all of them, you couldn't bend your fingers at such a range as you can. There is one more type of bone I promised I would go over, even though these are slightly less relevant to drawing. All throughout our bodies, wherever joints exist, another bone can exist. These bones are part of why we say bones have an average amount rather than a dedicated amount, because these bones are different for each person. These bones are called the sesamoid bones, and if they sound like sesame seed bones, that's because that's exactly what they're named after, because it's what they resemble. These bones show up to help combat extreme tension in different parts of the body. If I had to guess, forming these bones is why you want to start certain skills, like playing the violin, early. Anyways, there are 2 common sesamoid bones in the hand, found on the thumb metacarpal here and here. But like I said, they can go on almost any bone joint, though they're not nearly as likely to be on the carpals. These only affect drawing by making the joints of any particular part of the body slightly bigger and more bony. But now you have a way to explain it if you want to add massive joints to any of your characters. Alright, so we've talked about the technical stuff for long enough. Let's get into doing some drawings. So first, let's build boxes to get the basic shapes of the hands. Next, we'll do more in-depth boxes to shape a majority of the bones. From here, we'll practice giving each hand a different pose. And of course, we can't forget practicing lighting and shading on these. Okay, put those aside for a moment. We've got some more learning to do because the body isn't just bones, it's also muscles. Muscles. Okay, so we've discussed how bones sit and what they do, but those bones can't move on their own. They either need muscles and tendons, engineering, or magic. We're going to focus on muscles and tendons, which will just be shortened to muscles unless I have to talk about a specific tendon. Now, the muscles in the hand are actually primarily controlled by the muscles in the forearm. And while that's a super interesting topic, I am focusing on how to draw the hand, so we're really only going to go into the basics on these ones. Pretty much every muscle on the forearm is dedicated to bending or releasing the hand and wrist. There are several muscles, all of which have super fun and interesting names, but for the sake of time, I'm going to do this part with muscle groupings rather than explain what each and every muscle does. These muscles help flex the different parts of the fingers and wrist. These muscles help extend them. There are 4 main overlapping parts of each side of the arm. For the dorsal side, we have these muscle groups. The first one mostly straightens the thumb and sits in between the radius and the ulna. The second one sits on top of the first one and primarily helps lift the thumb and straighten the index finger. This third layer helps straighten all of the fingers as well as straighten and bend the wrist back. This fourth layer also has 2 functions. This part helps straighten and bend the wrist back, while this part guides and holds the tendons connected to these muscle groups. In case this isn't information you knew, tendons are not muscles but are often included with muscles, like I'm doing, because they're like the glue that connects the muscles to the bones and actually help control both. Now for the palmar side. We have another 4 muscle groups. This first group also goes in between the ulna and the radius and is primarily there to hold the 2 bones together, but also has the super important function of rotating the forearm inward. The second grouping here is all about bending the fingers. This is considered deep muscle, which I think just means muscle underneath a bunch of other muscle. Not sure why I really only see it specified for these ones when the muscle between the bones exists, but that's for someone with a doctorate to explain. Next is this muscle group, and it kind of just plops on top of the other muscles on this side and fills it out more. These muscles have 2 functions as well. This part helps bend the wrist and fingers. This part helps guide and hold the tendons in place. And lastly, this muscle helps bend the wrist. This other muscle does too, but it only exists in some people and creates a fun effect in those who do. You can watch a video that shows that in the comments below. Trigger warning though, it is on a cadaver. A little more on the hand muscles specifically, since we mostly discussed the forearm up to this point. I'll keep these the same color as they were in our last portion so you know which muscles are included twice. Starting here on the dorsal side, These muscles found between the metacarpal bones spread the fingers and move them back together. These are the tendons that connect to all parts of the hand and to the muscles. These are all tendons more than muscles from what I can tell, and are what connect to the muscles in order to help straighten the fingers. On the palmar side, these are those same muscles between the metacarpals. Then these muscles go on top and move the thumb towards the palm of the hand. These tendons and muscles are what bend the phalanges. And then these muscles, tendons, and other structures, apparently there's tubes involved, hold down the tendons, help move the little finger so that it can touch the thumb, lubricate the long tendons of the muscles, and move the thumb so that it can bend across the hand and touch each finger. Overall, this is what the muscle groups of the hands look like. Alright, awesome. Now we know how muscles form on the bones. And we've got all those cool bone sketches from earlier. So let's go ahead and practice putting muscles on them. Let's add them layer by layer first. Layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and 4. And then some detail work to show where they connect. Next, we'll add in the shading here. And maybe we'll even break that down into some basic shapes that incorporate the muscles so we don't always have to put every step in before getting here. But something is still missing. Skin. Oh yeah, all of that stuff discussed up until now was coming to this point. Skin is the decorative paper that makes the gift of human life less horrifying. And, like a well-done gift wrap, it tends to form-fit the things inside of it. We didn't discuss some of those things like veins and fat, but those are things you can ignore when first drawing hands and get more into when you're trying to do super detailed hands. So I'll leave those out of this tutorial. My very basic understanding of skin in general is that there are certain places where your skin absolutely has to be thicker in order to keep you safe. This occurs in specific places, including the palms of your hand and the soles of your feet. This extra layer of skin is called the stratum lucidum. This type of skin thickness does a few things that artists should be aware of. It creates a different texture on your palms and soles, lessens the need for melanin, or a protective pigment in the skin beneath it, making palms and soles generally lighter than the skin around it, and with more redness from the blood and whatnot inside of the body. Makes folds less common, creating wider wrinkles and deeper folds. In places where that extra thickness doesn't exist, you can also have a thinner skin where the joints exist in order to create more skin that acts a lot like a tight jeggings fabric. Usually it stretches and returns to its shape when bent, except in extreme cases. Just like jeggings, when your thinner skin gets squished together, it'll fold in on itself. But, unlike jeggings, your skin accounts for the wide flexes of your fingers and hand by adding more fabric to the joints like knuckles, creating folds like this when your fingers are straight, and defining the bones and muscles in the connections between the metacarpals and phalanges here when let to rest. Fun fact, because the skin is thinner, it also tends to be redder because there's less skin adding pigment to it. Extra fun fact, when the skin is stretched tighter, it's more reflective, creating brighter highlights. I'm also going to take a second and talk about fingernails here because so many people don't really know what to do with fingernails, so I'm just going to do a quick diagram showing where they come from and how they sit on the hand. Nails are this shape and sit on the nail bed, which from what I can tell is a layer of skin that sits more or less on the distal phalange. It starts under the skin near the base of the distal phalange and kind of stabs its way out of the skin layers, which folds over it, creating a roundness around the nail as it protrudes out. So with all that in mind, let's add some skin and nails to our pre-done drawings here. This is a point where you want to keep in mind where the muscles and bones sit, outlining the ones that would protrude a bit more while ignoring the ones that fade into oblivion. Also, remember the skin stretches from one point to the next, so there will be points that have less in them, like on the fingers, that still have straighter lines thanks to skin elasticity. Keep in mind the way light and shadows will hit. Here's what those hands look like now that we've gone through each step. But you don't just want to draw hands, right? You want to render them too. Rendering. Alright, so we've built up the shapes of the bones, of the muscles, of the skin, kept light and shadow in mind, paid attention to the pigmentation differences of each of the different parts of the hand, and understood the way skin wraps around each part of the hand with wrinkles and stretching. So, let's start adding color. I'm going to do the same thing I did with faces and start with a lighter skin tone and add additional skin tones to it to show the basics. So we start with a basic color here, then add a lighter pink/yellow tone to depict the stratum lucidum. After that, we'll do the red tones to show the folds and closer inside bits. Then do a darker red color for the shadow, and a darker color than that for extreme shadow, especially in the bends. And then a lighter color for the highlight, and an extreme lighter color for the smoother parts of the skin. Next, let's see those same examples with different skin tones, just to show that this is how it works pretty much every time. And lastly, let's get into that rendering. I will likely be speeding this part up, so expect your rendering time to be much slower, but here's my general process for rendering hands once they're set up and drawn. First, soften transitions and add some textures at those transitions to account for the roughness of the skin. We'll get back to texture in a little bit, so don't worry about this being perfect. Remember to keep hard lines for hard transitions like in the folds and the shadows. You can also add in detail for the fingernails here. Add in more texture to really show the buildup of the skin itself. Highlights are a great way to handle this step, but you can also use blemish colors and shadow colors. Give your hand some character by drawing in extra details like wrinkles, scars, blemishes, and folds. Hands can be a great way to tell a story and are far more interesting than many artists give them credit for. And of course, every one of these tutorials is going to come with a free coloring page featuring whatever we're working on, and here's what we have today. I'm going to be using the same techniques I did with what I showed you in the rendering portion. Because this tutorial was a little longer, I may speed parts of this up as well. I choose the base color and add in the stratum lucidum color. Then I add in the red tones for the inside bits. I get that darker red color for the shadow and a darker shadow after that. Next, I do the lighting colors and the extreme highlights. And then I start to soften up the transitions. I make sure that I'm keeping hard lines for hard transitions like folds, and then clean up everything that I can. After that, I create some skin textures. I add in the extra details on the hands, and just like before, here's me flattening out the rest of the piece so that you can see those hands in action. Thanks for joining me on this tutorial and sticking with me until the end. I hope it helps. Remember, if you color this one, to post your results and tag me and Archer K Paint Along. And if you like this format better than the faces one, or if you think I should keep even the more complicated things as simple as possible, please let me know so I can adjust accordingly. If you have any questions about anything in the video, or have any suggestions for future paint along videos, please let me know in the comments. Also, I did post a short about this, but for those of you who are not in the know, if you heard the beginning of the video, we have a new intro song. It was made by a lovely, wonderful person who I will link in the comments below. They are just now rebuilding their image, so they've got a completely new Twitter. Please go give them a follow. If you liked this video, please hit me with that like button and consider subscribing for more tips and tricks on art improvement, as well as art memes, tutorials, and other artistic support. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!